Right, there we go. Well, welcome to Incorporating Course Design and Universal Design for Learning. I'm here with some wonderful people, but I'm going to pass it off to wonderful Karen. Karen, who are you?
Oh, thanks, Brad. That's a great way to start us off with lots of energy. My name is Karen Crouch. I work at the University of Colorado-Boulder. I'm an instructional designer and technology consultant with the ASSET department, which is Arts and Sciences Supportive Education Through Technology, which is a long acronym, part of the Center for Teaching and Learning. Um, I have red hair. I've got glasses today. I am a female presenting, but also my pronouns are she, they. I'm wearing kind of a purple sweater. And did I say I have red hair? I have red hair for those of you that might need that. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Brad. Maybe you could introduce yourself, Brad.
Awesome. My name is Brad Grabham. I am an old K-12 teacher who has been working in higher ed since about 2005. And so I've been at CU Boulder since 2012. I'm here for fun. And really, it's just to think about that engagement in the student process. So I'm part of the learning design group here in continuing ed at CU Boulder. And I'm just letting people in as we go. And that's me. Becky, do you want to say hi real quick?
Hello, I'm Becky. I'm an instructional designer with the Learning Design Group too. I've been in instructional design for about 15 years and 5 years at CU Boulder. I have like very red hair, pink. We're not really sure what color it is. It's a make your own mix in a bowl color, glasses, and I'm glad to be here with you guys.
Oh, I love it. And I forgot to mention, I'm Brad, as Brad, I'm a 50-year-old white guy with like graying brown hair and a shirt that says CU Boulder on it that is in honors of the Masters golf game that's going on this week. So that's what we've got. But yeah, we just want to introduce you. And today we're going to have a little bit of fun talking about universal design for learning. And Karen, maybe I pass it off to you.
That sounds really great. And thanks for Becky for putting extra links in the chat and also keeping us updated so we can just present. So this will help us actually with the presentation going forward. And again, Brad mentioned, you can come off mute, you can put things in chat, however you want to show up today, works for us. But we kind of want to know, what's your familiarity with Universal Design for Learning? We'll call it UDL a lot of times. We'll just use that acronym. One would be, I understand the concept and know how or have implemented it. Two, I understand the concept, I'm not sure how to implement it. Three, I've heard the term, but I don't know much about it. And four, I have never heard this term. And there's no judgment here. We just kind of want to know, oh, I'm getting a lot of ones, so that's fantastic. That helps us know the speed in which we will talk about that versus how to put it into course design. Yeah, thank you so much. 3, 2 point. I like the 0.5s. That's great. Identify yourself however you want to on that awesome scale. So thanks for your creativity. Perfect. And then if you are a 1 or a 2, then feel free to jump in as well. Like, Brad and I like to lead the session, but we recognize that there are a lot of expertise in the room and experts, and feel free to, add to the conversation in the ways you've worked with it. So thanks so much.
We just love your lived experiences.
And then, speaking of those that put 1, 2, 3, like as you think about universal design for learning, is there a word, a term, or something that maybe comes to mind for you? What is universal design for learning? What do we already know? And we have 2 images here on this slide. And one of them is kind of the classic, oh, I'm walking through the grocery store. You've got the double doors there. Someone's coming out in a wheelchair. Someone else is coming out with their cart. And then we have a bit of an image here of round universal design for learning. It's accessible, fair, straightforward, flexible, readily perceived, learning space, supportive environment, minimize unnecessary effort. And I've kind of given you some hints, so hopefully that's helpful. And some of the words I've already said, you could repeat that, or you could just throw in what do you already know. Yeah, perfect. I like the 0 zeros. That's fantastic. What word, phrase, again, come off mute, throw it in the chat. What do we already know about universal design for learning? We'll kind of attach some of that. Give everyone a minute to throw it into the chat. Any word, phrases come to mind? Thank you. The Mitch Hedberg bit on escalators. Yeah, similar to UDL. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, we've got universal design, which we know oftentimes when it comes to buildings, right? And we actually put that picture in there because universal design, as we know it in architecture, is something we utilize every single day. So thank you, Amanda. Inclusivity, intentionality, fantastic. Those are great words. Accessibility, learning styles, I see from Robin. Perfect. Multi-navigability. Thank you, Chris. I love that. Yeah, we're going to talk about multiple means today. That's fantastic. It's giving students accessible ways to learn and complete assessments. Yes, multiple ways. You guys are nailing it. That's perfect. If we can go back just for a minute, Brad, I just want to go ahead and mention a little bit about the history about universal design for learning. It really was termed by Ronald Mace in the field of architecture back in the 1960s. And then Selwyn Goldsmith popularized it as well in the Designing for Disabled in 1963. And then we're going to jump ahead to the 80s here, 1984. We've got Universal Design for Learning, Dr. David Rose and Dr. Ann Meyer, two researchers from the Harvard School of Education, actually incorporated CAST, which is the Center for Applied Specialized Technology. And fast forward here to 2020s, right? And it's still applicable today. And I think that that's really important. So CAST is a great resource for those of you that might not know, but really universal design for learning is a way to think about teaching and learning that helps all students get access to the material, engage, and really show what they know. So that's a little bit of the background. Thank you, Brad. And then we always, as instructional designers, love to have outcomes, right? So we've got some session outcomes today, which is to define universal design for learning. We're going to explore together that neuroscientific basis for UDL. We're going to look at principles and practices that can proactively support students and understand ways that UDL can promote accessibility, inclusive teaching and learning, which is big for me right now, right? I think we all are caring about that. And then finally, we do want to see how you can consider implementing UDL and specifically in course design, right? Yes, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that little clap. That gave me the enthusiasm I needed to say, I do love DEI and UDL has a place in that, especially with the revisions that have come up from this last summer. So we'll talk a little bit about that.
In the just to honor everybody and their expertise here, are there any things that you might want to get as an objective out of this today? If there's something that you really wanted to get out of UDL by 12:50 today, feel free to add it to chat just so we have it, so then we know what kinds of things to hit on. Otherwise, we'll move on.
Thank you, Brad. That was very meta. That was a UDL way of saying, does anyone have anything we should add, right? And I appreciate that. That's perfect. And there really are some goals with universal design for learning, some lovely goals. One is to reduce the barriers of learning through intentional design. I know we've got a bunch of instructional designers here. So who doesn't love a little proactive thinking in their design, right? And so universal design for learning, that is one of the goals. And also, it's looking at minimizing the need for accommodations or for individuals to have kind of a different pathway. It actually just bakes in those multiple means and pathways and offers an equitable learning experience for all students, right? That's what really matters is we're looking at, that variability for all our learners because there's no normal. So we can keep going. And then finally, this is something that we really love is, again, there's no expertise. Universal Design for Learning, they updated a bunch of their guidelines this summer. And one of the goals is to cultivate and work with learner agency. And I think that's something that speaks and is very meaningful for me, especially in andragogy, working with adult learners. But the design of learning environments to support learner agency. We want purposeful, we want reflective, resourceful, authentic, strategic, and action-oriented learners, right? And so what I really love is that UDL aims to change the design of the environment rather than to situate the problem as perceived with deficit from the learner, right? So let's not try to change our learners, let's recognize them where they're at and then sort of design around that. So great messaging. And then here's a little homage to the fact that we started off in architecture, right, with some framing tools in this image. But UDL provides a blueprint. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution, but really a flexible approach, can be customized with individual needs. We can see this around curriculum development, instructional goals, methods, the material, the content we're using, the assessments, which people already brought up before. And I think that that's a really great way to be looking at universal design for learning. It's a framework, right? It is an approach, a way, and almost a growth mindset, if you will. And then here's another time. I'd love to see you guys with the engagement in the chat. Come off mute, whatever feels right. But sometimes, I think about like CU Boulder. I've talked to faculty and consults, and they're like, oh, these students today. And they kind of have like, maybe one category, or, when we start pulling this out with different faculty and say, well, what are the dimensions of variability? Like, we know that learner variability exists. And that's what we can expect. So thinking about the students that you've worked with in the past, how are they different? In what ways do you see variability with your learners? Love to put that. Yeah, huge gaps in tech skills. That's right. People have different backgrounds, learning modality preferences. Thank you. This is wonderful. Yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, so I am a learning technology specialist here at the University of Tennessee, but I was a high school teacher for 16 years before that until changing in 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But and one of my expertise areas I've given presentations at different conferences about is the difference between pre-COVID college students and post-COVID,
Yes.
especially with Gen Z. And because I saw it as a high school teacher, because my last group are seniors in high school right now,
Yes.
that it's the expectations of not necessarily you have to cater to my learning style, but you need to respect everybody's learning style, not just the individual, which is counter to what a lot of people think Gen Z is like.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is something I saw where you were trying to um, meet the needs of all these other students, offer different ways of learning and different chances of learning, which as a learning technology specialist now working with faculty, I see a lot of, it's like 50-50, yay, I want to do it, versus they got to do what I say kind of thing. So
Yeah. Well, and Sarah, thank you so much for sharing that. And we do see UDL, like Brad and I have talked about this before, like UDL is super popular in K through 12, and then you get to higher ed, and like we need people who care. We need those leaders in this area, right? When it comes to universal design for learning. And you're right, like communication styles, the different methods that the different generations use, that's a great variability. And I see here in the chat, we've got prior knowledge, lived experiences. We've talked also about the pandemic, maybe diminished resiliency and hesitancy towards risk, or maybe there's a difference there between students on how risk-taking they are, right? Like I know I was a great risk taker and my best friend absolutely was not. And technology gaps, we're going to say it again and say it again. My background is also working with international students, right? And so when I think about, maybe people with different language abilities or non-native English speakers, that could be possible. We also see kind of an uptick with parents going back to school, right? And so we've got people with work and responsibilities and children. We see people that have, like we've mentioned, different lived experiences. One thing that hasn't been brought up are maybe different accessibility needs from people, right? Here at Boulder, we've got some skiers, right? And people that have temporary disabilities, and that needs to be considered as well, as long as people that have hidden accommodations, or maybe like myself, I didn't realize I was ADHD until later in life, which is now my superpower, yet was very frustrating with my executive functioning and organization as an undergrad, right? So we have these different needs, and first gen students, right? And people from different socioeconomic backgrounds that could play into some of those differences. So yeah, several students dealing with, hurricane, and then you've got some, and right now this is a stressful time, and we know it's very hard to learn when you're going through stress, right? So all these things can lead to sort of the dimensions of variability. Thank you guys for sharing in the chat too.
Oh, and I gotta hit what Sarah mentioned about also the late diagnosed ADHD. There are so many adults that are finding out their ADHD now. Now, I was an old K-12 teacher, special ed, social studies, and I am dyslexic. So I'm so glad we mentioned the accommodations and removing barriers. If I would have had this in like the 80s when I couldn't read in like high school, this would have been great, you know? So just had to say, yeah, go for it, Karen. I'll move on.
No, that's great. And I think that just gets to the depth of our learner, right? And how we're trying to accommodate so many different needs. And there's a little bit of work ahead, but you know, is it worth it? I think so, because you want to see those students succeed and develop that learner agency. So we're going to talk a little bit about universal design for learning and how it intersects with accessibility a little bit. So kind of move through that one. And I think it's kind of important to say that while accessibility and UDL are related, and in fact, accessibility is at the very foundation of UDL, they're not synonymous. They're actually two different frameworks or ways to look at things, but both the applications for accessibility guidelines and UDL are intended for that equitable access, and I believe are better off when it's in a proactive way of design. So at the very foundation of universal design for learning, we've got you've got to be able to get into the class, whether that's the physical building or the actual course that you're working in, the software for your learning management system. So we've got the physical learning environment, ramps, handrails, elevators, and then we've also got the content. And so we're looking at having what is accessible content, right? We don't want lockdown PDFs necessarily, but we want to be considering closed captioning, other ways that people can be able to access without issues, screen readers, that sort of thing. And then we've got this like kind of takeaway where UDL sort of has a bit of a lens in and of itself about looking at those enriched options for learning. So not just how the content is represented, but ways in which students and learners are able to get to that content, to choose and be able to have a little bit of choice and multiple means there. And then finally at the top, we've got on this graphic, UDL works to have these expert, resourceful, resilient learners, right? Because we know that that's what we want, is that learner agency. So in a universal designed, it's not just accessible information, but it's also accessible pedagogy and be thinking all the way up through the learner piece. So if you don't have kind of a foundation of accessibility, that is actually a really great place to start to apply the universal design for learning framework. And then we also want to recognize, Sarah mentioned this before, there's a little bit of a work sometimes when you've got universal design for learning, especially when you're working with faculty, to be talking about that. So we do want to talk that it is a paradigm shift. This could be something that could be a big shift when you're working with learners. And we've mentioned this before. We know variability is the normal, right? So we look at it from that way. I've mentioned this too. We really do not want to change the student or the learner so much as the curriculum, right? If someone's not successful in a course over and over again, we want to look at parts of the course and think about opening it up and looking at universal design for learning for that way. And then we want to remove those barriers to learning. This is one of my favorite, number 4, is to have tight goals, but flexible means. And I think about that on a hike. Again, we're in Colorado, so I'm going to make these weird Colorado references. So apologies for anyone coming. I'm from the South, by the way. So I do love hiking culture here, but there is a way to the top of the mountain and there's a preferred path perhaps. But if I open that path up and say, just get to the top, like I have my learning outcomes here, really tight. But now I'm opening up, show what you know and the way and the path and the journey that works for you. There could be thousands of ways to get there, right? So we're going to talk, and Brad specifically is going to talk more about what those flexible means could look like from a neuroscientific background. And then number 5 is just great too. This could be essential for some. You could have someone in your class that is seeking an accommodation that needs to have closed captioning on the videos. However, if you have closed captioning on videos, it's probably good for all. right? Now I can go ahead and watch that video and be able to make sure I'm catching all the scientific terms or that I'm spelling it because I'm not the best speller. So I'm able to learn in multiple ways by having the closed captions, as well as someone who might need that accommodation.
Oh, thank you, Karen.
Yeah,
This is a good
pass it
time
off
for
to
us.
you.
Transition time. And again, I just want to highlight our chat. Sarah, thank you so much for giving your perspective and lived experience. And Becky for providing our links. We sure do appreciate it. Well, we'd like to switch and talk a little bit about that scientific basis of UDL and then some actionable things you can do using that scientific basis of UDL. So, if we think about our brains, it is as unique as a fingerprint. And our image here is of a fingerprint brain, like a fingerprint on top of a brain. And so we really need to analyze or think about that wide variety of students that we might have. And this UDL really just gives us a research supported way of trying to reach the students. And so just to kind of think about this, let me get to the next slide. There's really three main networks of learning that we're trying to tap into. There's the engagement, the designing options for welcoming or interest, identifying students' interests with the topic area, their perceptions, their interaction. I think of that inside area, which on our little image here of the brain is the inside of the brain. That is really the why. Why do I care about this as a student? Like, how do you engage your students so that they want to participate in the content that you have? And then there's the representation, the content, designing options for effort and persistence, because that's a real thing, persistence throughout an entire course. Thinking about the language and the symbols, as Karen mentioned, with the captions and the expressions in your communications. So representation is that purple or maybe the back of the brain, what are you going to do with this knowledge, with all this content? And then there's action and expression, where really you're designing options for their emotional capacity, for them to build knowledge and to strategy develop. I think of action and expression as how they're going to show their mastery of content. That's really what we're focusing in on. But all of these areas, these networks of the brain, what we're really trying to do is give learners agency. We want learners to be co-developing with us, to put their lived experiences, their life into the course to help it relate so it means something. Now, there's links that awesome Becky is going to throw in. There's lots of information about engagement, representation, giving students different ways of getting information, and action and expression that have been linked in our slides. So I just wanted to make sure to point out the great resources at CAST, because they are really what we go off of. And then if I start thinking about those networks of the brain and the neuroscience, so if I jump into it a little bit, when I think about engagement, I'm really thinking about the why of learning, that insight. Why do I care about this material? Why am I taking Psych 1001 or something like that? But some ways that you could think about incorporating UDL into engagement is giving students choice. We heard about authentic engagement earlier today. We've heard a lot of different things about giving students choice, group projects, individual projects, but giving them choice is a great way of engaging students, highlighting the relevance of the course activities to their personal, professional, or academic goals. There aren't a lot of students right now that go to school just to learn. They're working for a job someday. And so thinking about how it's going to help them is a great way of engaging students. Fostering that community and collaboration is an engagement tool, really using those discussions and the collaborative tools we have available, and promoting that reflection and self-assessment. I think reflecting as an old K-12 teacher is so important to student learning. What did they learn? What was the muddiest point? What was their aha moment? It's good. And then it's also so important to be able to provide timely, actionable, ongoing feedback. So we really do want to be able to give students feedback that is actionable, not just great job, which is so easy to do. And we want to encourage beliefs and expectations that motivate the students, show how the content relates to that student's life. But really, the way we're doing this is if we're thinking about why we want to engage the students, it's because we want to have these authentic activities and assessments that show the students' mastery of concepts. They know how to cope with the content in front of them. They have strategies to be successful. We're growing that individual and that learner agency. So that's kind of a why. If you're thinking about how could UDL play into the why, if I think about the representation, it's really Canvas content. When I'm thinking about the what of learning, what are we learning about? Well, there's where a lot of our information is in that learning management system that we use. And providing information in multiple media formats is a great way to go. It doesn't mean you have to always have videos, always have every one of them, but to vary things periodically for students. It'll actually bring engagement by varying the content a little bit, but providing alternate formats. As me being an old special ed teacher working on accommodations, that's really where I lived in the 90s when I was doing that type of work. So when I think about Canvas content, I'm thinking about alternatives. What are we going to do if it's a visual and we need audio? Captions, as Karen mentioned, is huge. Canvas Studio is even doing pretty good with captions. Converting documents into accessible formats. We have a tool called Census Access. I know other people have UDoIt, and there's so many neat ones that are out there right now. But another recommendation, just to think about it, is to say, all right, I'm going to provide Word documents to my students. The reason to use Word documents is most students with an accommodation, or if they're a variable learner, whatever it might be, have learned how to use a lot of the tools to be successful. So if we provide content in a way that's successful, that the students already know how to use that content, we're in a much better place for those students. And the easy ones to do are just start thinking about, oh, I have an image. I should put an alt text on there so students can see what it's about, or image description, starting to think about that. And then adopt text with the digital version. So it's not a faculty member just using a scanner to copy pages as images into their Canvas course, but actually going in and getting those digital accessible versions is always a great way to go. And one thing we always recommend at CU Boulder is that it's always about providing the accessibility statement upfront. Boom, right in the syllabus, you tell people what is expected, how the accessibility is going to work, what's not accessible, that's in there. And use your campus supported technologies. You'll have support if it's something that the campus is using. Sometimes we run into weird third-party things where people want to use something that we don't support, and it's very difficult to problem solve or troubleshoot in those settings. So using what your campus has is really important to representation. The last one of thinking about these is really thinking about that how of learning, like how are the students going to do this? Now, Karen mentioned the skiing stuff. I have a habit of wiping out and hitting that frontal lobe of my brain, so it's a little slower to process some days. But that's really action and expression is how of learning. How are the students going to show mastery? And so one of the things I think that's so important with the multiple means of action and expression is to think about that scaffolded learning. One of the things with most instructors that have never taught before is to not just put up a paragraph assignment, but to break things into steps. How do we scaffold what's step one before they get to step two, to really break it up for their practice, but also for their performance? And then provide different ways of communicating. Maybe you're synchronous or asynchronous. Have a back channel, like we're kind of using chat today as a back channel. The conference is using Discord as a back channel. So it's kind of a neat way to go. And combine those delivery formats. Again, it's not that you have to do everything. It's to start. What if we try doing one thing with our courses? And then the next year we iterate a little bit more as we go. But really what it comes down to with universal design for learning and learning activities is we want to invite the learners to be co-creating. We want to give the learners learner agency to explore what class participation might look like. Are there online forums or supplement alternatives to live discussions? Can you invite students to help? In large courses, that's something I've done before, is I'll have students be in charge of certain parts of a class each day when we meet. And so maybe inviting students to moderate or co-facilitate activities or discussions is a great way to go if you're looking for that. But really allowing students to engage during the modes that work best for them. Like these days, I see more screenshots off a student's phone about an issue with Canvas than a web page. Everything's kind of off their phone these days. So just letting them know that they're going to be engaging in the way that works best for them. But really, it's that multiple formats for assessments. I'm such a big, and Karen would be talking for an hour. We could do a whole nother presentation about authentic assessments and how important those are. But it brings those real life lived skills into content, and then the students can show mastery of that content through their real life skills. So it's a great way to go. And I always like to give students choice of how they're going to submit. They're going to do a paper or a video. Do they want to make a podcast? Give them some choices of what, as long as you have a good, solid rubric, which is a whole nother conversation, but we could really go far with that. Same, Sarah, I do agree. And then, so to kind of get into the big parts of universal design for learning, this is the stuff Sarah learned back in the day when she was just learning this stuff. But the universal design for learning is really, PAST has got this nice website that kind of divvies up what each of these different things are. So like as an example, there is a whole column in that green color we were kind of looking at for engagement that talks about rows of access. Well, what does access mean for engagement? What does support mean in engagement? And what does emotional capacity or executive functioning mean for engagement? So if you think about UDL, the real goal is learner agency, to help students become purposeful and reflective, to help them become resourceful and authentic, and strategy and action oriented, because we know that's going to be the skill set students need down the road. And these different areas really help us to kind of dig into it. Now, the first time I looked at this, I'm like, oh gosh, this is too much. Too much. But the idea of UDL is to have a +1 attitude. What's one thing you might want to try this next time you teach the class? And then what could you do to reflect on that one thing you tried? How could you get students involved in reflecting on that thing so you can iterate upon it? So the way we kind of look at this big, huge thing is, if I take that multiple means of engagement, we're really talking about that principle, that main thing, multiple means of engagement. We have a guideline, like let's try to be welcoming, interests, and identities. And then there are some checkpoints, there's some things, considerations that we could do. Considerations is the word they're using now. It used to be checkpoints, but now it's considerations, because again, this is not like a one big thing you have to do at all. It's something where you can adapt UDL into what you're doing the way it works best for you. Personally, for me, nature and joy, I love. Okay, Karen, what were you going to say?
I was going to say the same thing. It's nurture, not nurture.
Nurture, yes.
Nurture, joy, and play. As a former K-12 teacher, I love that they added that over the summer. And I know we'll talk about some of those changes, but I think that's my favorite, though, is actually looking at that designing multiple means of engagement, the welcoming interests and identities is probably my favorite block. And as we look at some of this today, I'd love to know what you guys feel is your favorite.
Oh, thank you, Karen. So right. But just wanted to give you an idea of how to kind of analyze or look at those guidelines that we have. Not you have to do everything. They're just a guideline. They're there to help us and kind of score. So with these UDL guidelines, they have been adapted. We were using a version 2.2, which was adapted in 2018. And they just recently was it summer, Karen? I think it was summer. Yeah, summer, they updated to version 3.0 is maybe it was fall. They updated. So basically the change was really toward learner agency. So if we look at the older guidelines, which maybe I learned 10 years ago compared to what came out in 2024, the focus is really about that students' involvement. You can use UDL to co-create learning with your people, with students, with faculty, with your colleagues, depending on who you're working with. And the guidelines now place a greater emphasis on addressing the bias and exclusionary practices, aiming to give students more voice, choice, and autonomy in their learning. So when I think about these guidelines, it's really learner agency. Maybe when I was a teacher back in the 90s or 80s, I guess the 90s, then, we learned to be like, you were the lecturer in the classroom. Well, that's really not the way anymore. It's really about providing students options to be able to participate. And as we kind of think about it, the next steps is really about developing an implementation plan for yourself, thinking about what kinds of this, if we piqued your interest, if you're doing something with UDL, what's one thing that really isn't useful for you? And we have something, I think Becky will throw a link into chat, but it's something that was developed by Instructure Canvas. Oh, thank you very much. You can make a copy of this as we go into it. So you notice that the link that Becky put into our chat gives you a copy, so you can make a fresh copy of it. But basically what this is it's just an easy way of doing a checklist, of thinking about a checklist. And the checklist is really broken up into 1 stars, indicate essential and standard design competence for online learning, something that's a great place to begin. Oh, 2 stars, is where you're really considering best practices. 2 stars is you're adding value to the course. If you could start with a 1 star and then start thinking about 2 stars, that's a great way to go. And then 3 is exemplary or elevated learning. You're really getting into it. You're doing all the things, kind of like Sarah. Yeah. So we got some of that pieces in there. But really, the idea of this checklist is just to give us an opportunity to kind of take a look at some of this and see. Anything you want to add, Karen?
No, I was gonna say based on time, we're doing great. We still have 15 minutes. I almost want to know if we want to do like just maybe a 5 to 7 minute breakout room where everyone can look, take a moment and maybe find what's their favorite 1 star, 2 star, or 3 star in that course design. And I know that this is for Canvas. However, I feel like the resource we provided could be used for any learning management system with a little creativity and being able to adapt it.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. I'm game, Sarah. Karen. Sorry, I was looking at something else.
I'll
Yeah.
set up breakout rooms. Let me know when you're ready.
Oh,
Yeah.
you did it already. All right. Do we just want 2? Oh,
I'm gonna do 3.
all right.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's take like 5 minutes just to look at it because I'd love to hear what people were thinking about that.
All right. Boop. And people can jump in. All right. Breakout
Just
room
a heads up,
unassigned.
Brad and Karen, I did not put us in the rooms. I'll stay in the main one.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll go to room 3.
Perfect.
You said we're doing 5 minutes?
Yeah, just 5 minutes, just to be
Okay,
able to look
cool.
at that.
I'm staying here.
That's fine too.
Let's hang out together. Hey,
I know. I'm so tired.
I was awake. You saw my message.
Yeah.
All right, we'll give it just 15 seconds left before everyone's forced back in. Okay, everyone's coming back.
I'll share my screen again. We're getting some
Perfect.
people back.
Yeah, I'm just curious, did anyone have a favorite 1 star, 2 star, or 3 star that like spoke to them?
I know in our breakout, we were talking about video content and hosting video content, streaming media, those pieces to it and trying to make more, how to use that in a better way. So that's something that came up in our little breakout, but I don't know about others.
I know I've personally been running into the link validator and needing to make sure all the links are updated. I'm finding so many broken links lately in courses that's been really helpful for me.
Yes. Anything else jumping out at you people? Otherwise, should I move on, Karen? All right, this kind of goes with it. Oh, and so, sorry, I'm getting people back in again. We lost some during the breakouts and now we're back again. All right. So yeah, some people had to stay away. There we go. Low stakes formative assessments. Good job, Ryan. I'm just catching up on stuff. So yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, I appreciate you throwing in some things you can do right away to implement UDL. If there's stuff that you'd like to, mail 2 links is what Chris put in there. All my courses. I like it. Anything else jumping at you of things that you could do right away to implement UDL in your work? Anything jumping out at you?
I'm going to put some joy in there.
Go for it. Yeah. I know for me, it's always like, oh, are there images? That's an easy +1. I'm going to go through all the images and add alt text. That's going to be a step 1 for me or a +1 I can do. Anybody else? Moving on. All right, so if we're thinking about some of these strategies, just to kind of take it all down, and really, it's all about small steps. Leah and I, I think she already left. Oh no, Leah's there. Yeah, Leah and I were talking about kind of breaking things up, and even with video context, kind of breaking things up. Oh, that's so great, Chris. You're putting in there. Had ChatGPT help with writing alt text for images. That's a great one, Chris. But yeah, it's small steps. We're really looking for taking small steps, one thing at a time, +1 attitude, and start thinking about that design and accessibility. That's kind of where I start. Are there things that might be a barrier? Something that's going to be hard to navigate? I think Ryan mentioned earlier multiple ways of navigating courses. I think that's a really important thing. And then the third one is really thinking about giving learners choice and how could they do it? One of the things AI, as Chris mentions ChatGPT to help with some of that, is AI has been a great tool to say, all right, I've got a written paper. What should I do with this? How could it be a video? How could it be an audio? What could a rubric look like for this? And so some of these tools are really, really great at helping us develop multiple means of action. So just like to point that out. And
I was going to
yeah.
say too, just to support and validate that, Brad and Chris, like I've been having so much fun asking like, oh, if I'm designing this type of like assessment or quiz, like how could I like change it up? What could be a way to do a multiple means activity? And I've been utilizing AI a ton for that when my brain's been tired. And it's actually given me some great ideas as far as UDL goes.
Yeah, I'm right with you with that stuff. So thank you. But really, as a wrap up and thinking about what to do with course design and instructional or universal design for learning, it's really UDL is a growth mindset. We're going to learn something. We're going to try something new. We're going to analyze it. We're going to have students reflect. We'll reflect and we'll see what we want to change the next iteration. Ask learners to get them involved. There's those reflections that'll help you know if there was anything confusing that's going on, and reach out for support. We people like us, and I'll go to the next slide, is really we just are reach out to us for help. We're here for you. It's all about having that +1 attitude. So it's all about, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to get my students involved and see what happens next. And so I think that's a great way of going and engaging those students. And the final part is contact us if you want more information. Karen Crouch, if you're right there, if you need us for anything, there's my information if needed, and Becky. So feel free to reach out to us if there's anything. And we would love to give the last 5 minutes just for questions or if there's anything that comes up you want to do. But we really do thank you, and please provide us some feedback on this event. We sure do appreciate it. Yeah. But I just wanted to give like 5 minutes for questions, comments, if there's anything people wanted to work on here at the end or anything else. Thank you, Karen for presenting, and Becky for doing all the chat stuff. Any questions or concerns? What I'll do is I'll stop the recording. Maybe that'll, so that way you don't have